The Divine Pedigree of Man, or the Testimony of Evolution and Psychology to the Fatherhood of God, by Thomson J. Hudson. Preface. In attempting to fulfill a task so important, and from a layman's point of view so difficult, as that of outlining a scientific basis of Christian theism, I feel it to be due to my readers that I should state the causes which led me to undertake it, and the principles by which I have been guided in carrying it to a conclusion. It is scarcely necessary to remark that this book was not written for the benefit of those who have already found in Holy Writ sufficient evidence to convince them of the existence of an intelligent great first cause. Nor was it written to convince anybody of the soundness of the theory of organic evolution. It was written for the benefit of that large and constantly enlarging class of men who were imbued with the ultra-scientific dogma that nothing in either physical science or spiritual philosophy is worthy of belief, if it is not confirmed by a series of well-authenticated facts, a congeries of observable natural phenomena. This class, of course, includes many who are not themselves scientists, but who, having been unable to assimilate the logic of the theologian, pin their faith upon the asseverations of those scientists who claim to have definitely ascertained that there is nothing in man that cannot be dragged to light by means of the surgeon's instruments or the appliances of the chemist's laboratory, or upon the reasoning of those logicians who claim to have discovered, by the process of inductive inquiry, that there is no logical necessity for the existence of an intelligent deity. It was written more especially for the benefit of that large and constantly multiplying class of intelligent students who have become convinced of the substantial correctness of the general theory of organic evolution, many of whom have, at the same time, been led to adopt the atheistic conclusions reached by the great pioneers in that science. Not that all, or even the greater part, of the students of evolution have been thus led astray, for they have not. On the contrary, I think it may be safely assumed that a great majority of educated persons of all religious denominations now recognize evolution as God's method of creation. They have, indeed, not been slow to recognize the fact that the teleological argument has been immensely fortified by the simple facts of organic evolution, and they have been content to ignore the atheistic hypotheses that were at first heralded as necessary elements of the theory of evolution itself. Nevertheless, there are many earnest seekers after truth who are not thus fortified against the specious arguments of atheism, some of whom are prone to accept, at its face value, the gratuitous assumption that the atheistic hypotheses of evolutionists are as well sustained by facts as is the theory of evolution itself. It was to expose this error, this fruitful source of manifold errors, and to show that the facts of evolution are susceptible of no other than a theistic interpretation, that this book was written. In other words, it was written to show that the facts of organic and mental evolution point clearly and unmistakably to a divine origin of mind and life on this earth, and that the atheistic theories of agnostic evolutionists are positively and unqualifiedly destitute of facts to sustain them. I have, therefore, deemed it best to frame my argument upon purely scientific lines, avoiding speculative philosophy and adhering strictly to the inductive method of investigation. To that end, I have resisted the temptation to strengthen my argument by quotations from Holy Writ, although the Bible is full of pertinent passages which the biblical scholar will not fail to recognize and apply. I have not even touched upon the teleological argument, although the teleologist will not fail to find an abundance of material for his purpose in the facts presented. As already intimated, the facts of organic and mental evolution alone form the basis of my argument for theism, per se. And when I say that I have accepted those facts as they are set forth by the atheistic evolutionists, the reader will understand that I have not selected my authorities from among those who might be biased in favor of my conclusions. Also, I have accepted their arguments in favor of the general theory of organic evolution, and I have carried those arguments to their logical conclusion. In so doing, I have shown that every fact and every argument that sustains the theory of evolution also proves, with stronger reason, the divine origin of life and mind. In pursuing my investigations, I have adopted the plan of going back to the very beginning of organic life on this planet in search of evidence to prove my thesis. I have done this on the theory that the nearer we approach to the source of anything, the more clearly will the nature of the source be revealed in the observable phenomena. When I say that I have not been disappointed in my quest, the reader may understand that I have found in the lowest forms of animal life indubitable evidence of the divine origin of mind and life on this earth. I have also duly considered the other salient facts, phases, and stages of organic evolution, from the Mon-era to man, with the result of finding that the uniform trend is in the same direction. It is, however, one thing to establish the general doctrine of the divine origin of life and mind, and quite another to sustain the specific doctrine of Christian theism. The one is amply proven by the facts of organic evolution alone. The other requires the aid of psychology. I have, therefore, given particular attention to the latter science, not only with special reference to its bearing upon Christian theism, but with regard to its bearing upon the general subject of organic evolution. Those readers who are familiar with my former works will readily understand that I refer to the new psychology, that is, to that system of psychology the fundamental principles of which were outlined in The Law of Psychic Phenomena. In the present work, I have simply carried to its legitimate conclusion the fundamental hypothesis set forth in the work above mentioned. I have been moved to do so for many good and sufficient reasons, among which are: 1. The hypothesis has already been demonstrated to be capable of correlating all psychical phenomena and explaining them on scientific principles. 2. It harmonizes with all the facts of the physical sciences, including those of organic and mental evolution. 3. It is the only hypothesis that furnishes a complete answer to the arguments of materialism in reference to the question of the existence of a soul in man, or of its immortality. 4. And finally, it is the only psychological hypothesis yet promulgated that completely harmonizes all the facts of science with the essential doctrines of the Christian religion. I have felt constrained, therefore, to make psychology a prominent feature of this book, and in so doing I have attempted to outline the fundamental principles which may manifest the harmony that exists between science and religion. Owing to the limitations of space in a volume like this, I have been compelled to confine myself to the specific subject of Christian theism, leaving much unsaid that bears upon the general subject of Christianity. The purpose of my undertaking will have been accomplished, however, if I have been able to point out to others a method of research which will enable them to carry forward the work that is here begun. I have no apology to make for the faults of construction and style of this book, other than to say that it may appear that there are undue repetitions, but it will be found that these are necessary to the continuity of the thought or argument. Some of them are, perhaps, due to the fact that much of the matter has been taken from my lectures and essays on special branches of the subject here treated. Thomson J. Hudson. The Divine Pedigree of Man. Part 1. Evolution and Psychology. Introduction. It is the boast of science that its only quest is truth, and that in its pursuit the inductive method of inquiry is never departed from. So persistently have scientists iterated and reiterated this declaration, and so abundant are the evidences that they have in the main adhered to it, that the uncritical world is wont to accept as truth whatever bears the scientific label, and as valid whatever conclusions are alleged to have been reached by the process of induction. Nor can it be denied that the constantly multiplying scientific appliances of modern civilization afford indubitable evidences of the value, not to say the infallibility, of the Baconian methods of research in the realm of physical science. The marvelous success of the inductive method of searching for truth in the material world not unnaturally gave rise to the broad declaration, by the materialistic scientists, that no theory of causation, spiritual or physical, is worthy of serious consideration unless it be sustained by a series of well-authenticated facts that can bear no other possible interpretation. This was the prevailing idea among skeptical scientists and their followers when Darwin propounded the theory that the organic world owed its existence to progressive development and inheritance from the lower forms of animal life. With what alacrity this theory was accepted by the skeptical scientists, and how thoroughly it was reprobated by the theological world, are matters of history. The reasons for the acceptance on the one hand and the rejection on the other were, of course, identical. The theory, if true, disproved the then prevailing theological dogma of special, miraculous creations of species in the organic world. It was here that the first great, fundamental error was committed by both sides. On the part of the atheistic scientists, it consisted in the assumption that, by disproving the doctrine of special creations, they had eliminated God from the universe, or, to use the language of Romanes, they had thereby obviated the logical necessity for a God. On the part of the theologians, the mistake consisted in accepting the conclusion as a valid deduction from the premise, thus rendering it logically necessary for them to denounce the doctrine of evolution itself. For the time being, no one seemed to regard any middle ground as logically possible, and the breach between science and religion seemed wider than ever. After a few years had elapsed, however, the most liberal-minded, intelligent, and unprejudiced of both sides began to realize that it did not necessarily follow that, if the theory of evolution was the true explanation of organic life, it obviated the logical necessity for an intelligent great first cause of all things. On the contrary, as the true theory of organic evolution came to be better understood by its early enemies, and their first crude and ridiculous conceptions of it were dissipated by a knowledge of its real scope and significance, it became more and more evident that evolution is simply God's method of creation. With this clearer understanding of the subject came higher conceptions of the true nature and character of the divine mind than had ever before prevailed. God was seen to be a being of infinite intelligence and power, incapable of creating and governing this universe by means of his own immutable laws. In a word, the teleological argument, or the argument from evidences of intelligent design, was strongly reinforced by the facts of organic evolution. In point of fact, it was found that the teleological evidences afforded by evolution far outweigh in real significance all that were ever before adduced. This, however, is by no means the most important part of the evidences for theism to be found in the facts of organic evolution. It is, in fact, no part of the object of this volume to press the teleological argument, although abundant facts will be developed suggestive of teleological conclusions, which the intelligent reader will draw for himself. My object is to show that the facts of organic evolution afford abundant material from which to study the subject of theism by the pure process of induction, leaving nothing to the imagination, nothing to speculative philosophy. That is to say, I shall undertake to show that the salient facts of evolution, as developed by the researches of anti-theistic scientists, are susceptible of no other than a theistic interpretation. Without an utter abandonment and repudiation of every principle of logical, scientific inductive investigation. To that end, I shall undertake to prove that they have avoided a theistic interpretation of their own facts, only by abandoning, at all the crucial points in their inquiry, the plainest principles of induction, and soaring away into the cloudy realms of speculative philosophy without one fact, or semblance of a fact, to sustain their hypotheses. I shall show, for instance, that Mr. Darwin's great principle of natural selection, when considered as the origin of species, is, in that sense, without a fact to sustain it. Natural selection, or survival of the fittest, is a potent factor in the process of organic development, and no theory of evolution could be complete without it. But it is preservative of species, not creative. I shall sustain this view by the opinions of such scientists as Huxley, and I shall demonstrate it by facts presented by such evolutionists as Haeckel. Mr. Darwin has presented a formidable array of facts to demonstrate the correctness of his fundamental theory of organic evolution, and no unprejudiced person can deny that he has abundantly sustained that theory. He has also cited a great number of facts which he assumes to have a bearing upon his subsidiary hypothesis. Nevertheless, it is true that he has not cited one case where anything more than a morphological species has been produced, either by natural or artificial selection. In this sense, therefore, his theory that natural selection is the origin of species must be relegated to the domain of speculative philosophy without facts to sustain it, the very opposite of induction. I shall venture to infer that his strenuous insistence upon that theory may have been due to one or both of two causes. One of these was his hostility to Lamarck and his theory of appetency as the cause of structural changes in organic life, and the other, his desire to sustain the atheistic theory that physical organism antedates and is the cause of life and mind. In reference to these questions, I shall undertake to show that Lamarck's or some cognate theory is necessary in order to constitute a complete, coherent theory of organic evolution. That is to say, no theory of evolution can be complete, in the sense of accounting for all the facts, if either Lamarck or Darwin is left out. For that reason I shall go back, with Haeckel, to the beginning of organic life on this planet, and prove that mind antedates and is the cause of physical, structural organism, as these crucial facts can be demonstrated at the beginning of organic life, and are not so easily proven at any other stage of evolutionary development. I shall claim the right to hold that they are typical examples showing the cause of structural changes in physical organism at all subsequent stages of organic development. I shall lay particular stress upon the foregoing considerations because of their important bearing upon the question of the origin of life on this planet. The latter is the great question which it is the prime object of this book to discuss. Two theories are to be considered, and each will be treated with special reference to the facts of organic evolution. The atheistic theory will first be considered, for the reason that it is more easily disposed of than the other, owing to the acknowledged absence of facts to sustain it constitutes, in fact, another striking illustration of the alacrity with which atheistic scientists will abandon the inductive processes of investigation whenever the facts are against them. The atheistic theory is that life and mind originated on this earth by spontaneous generation from inorganic matter. That is the theory, and that is all there is of it. That is to say, its ablest advocates acknowledge that no fact has ever yet been brought to light tending to prove that such a thing is possible. On the contrary, their greatest scientists have spent years in patient and persevering efforts to cause the faintest sign of life to be generated from inorganic matter, and each one has been compelled to acknowledge his utter failure. In a word, I shall show by these facts, with others equally significant, that not only have atheistic scientists abandoned and tacitly repudiated the inductive method at every crucial point in their investigations, but that all that there is of atheism in evolution consists of pure assumption, not only without facts to sustain the assumptions, but in direct contravention of all the facts of nature and of experimental science. The theory of the theistic evolutionist is that evolution is God's method of creation, that life and mind on this earth had their origin in an antecedent divine mind, an omnipresent mind energy, omnipotent and omniscient, that this divine, intelligent energy operates, not in contravention of law, not by miraculous interventions, not by special creations, but in pursuance of its own immutable laws, instituted from the beginning, and that, consequently, the first mind energy that appeared on this earth was an emanation, in the natural order of events, from the divine intelligence. In undertaking to establish the essential truth of this hypothesis, I shall be guided solely by the acknowledged facts of organic and mental evolution. In other words, I shall adhere to the inductive method, pure and simple. In pursuing the investigation, I shall again go back to the beginning of organic life, for the obvious reason that the nearer we approach to the source of anything, the more clearly will the essential nature of that source be made manifest, and for the further reason that no one else, so far as I am aware, has given adequate attention to the wonderful significance, from a theistic point of view, of the phenomena of life and mind as exhibited in the lowest form of animal life. It must suffice in this connection to say that the ingenuity of man could not devise a more complete array of evidential facts demonstrative of the divine origin of mind and protoplasm and its potentialities through evolutionary development than is found in the modern era. Evolutionists tell us that the potentialities of manhood reside in that lowest animal organism. If man descended from that organism, the proposition is necessarily true, and I shall demonstrate its truth by indubitable evidences that atheism has not considered. In doing so, I shall prove more clearly that the monoran derived its mind and life from God than atheists have proven that man descended from the monoran. In other words, I shall demonstrate the truth of their evolutionary hypothesis by disproving their atheistic conclusions. I shall not only prove that the potentialities of manhood reside in the monoran, but that the essential attributes of omniscience there exist in embryo. Moreover, I shall prove by their own showing that, differing only in degree, the monoran is endowed with the creative energy of omnipotence, that to that energy are due all the structural changes that mark the steps in the process of organic evolution, and that all human progressive development, from savagery to the highest possible altruistic civilization, is due to the normal development of faculties existing potentially in the monoran. In the further argument of the question, I shall not only be guided by the facts set forth by the great lights of evolutionary science, but I shall avail myself of their arguments as well. That is to say, the leading arguments employed by them to prove the theory of evolution will be carried to their logical conclusions and shown to be the strongest possible arguments in support of theism. For instance, the argument based upon the law of heredity, which is the chief cornerstone in the evolutionary edifice, when carried to its legitimate conclusion, will be seen to demonstrate the logical necessity of a mind, antecedent to the monoran, possessing powers identical in kind with those actually or potentially existent in the monoran and its descendants. Any other conclusion involves the logical necessity of presupposing a break in the line of hereditary descent, an exception to a law of nature, a godlike mind without an ancestral intelligence, an effect without an adequate cause. Again, I shall accept their analogical argument from ontogeny, which is the history of the evolution of individual organisms, to phylogeny, which is the history of the evolution of organic tribes. Human ontogeny, being an exact repetition of all the salient features of human phylogeny, constitutes one of the most conclusive arguments in support of the theory of organic evolution. Both ontogeny and phylogeny begin with an undifferentiated cell of protoplasm, and in both cases that cell culminates in man. But if the analogy be carried to its legitimate and logically necessary conclusion, it necessitates an ancestral mind for the monoran as well as for the germinal cell of man, and for precisely the same reasons. Certainly the analogy is incomplete without it, and no scientist will deny the proposition that science has never yet discovered any process by which faculties have been acquired, either in ontogeny or phylogeny, except by inheritance. The atheistic evolutionist, therefore, cannot avoid the conclusion that the monoran inherited its powers, actual and potential, from a divine ancestry, without repudiating his own logic, ignoring his own facts, and abandoning the inductive method of scientific research. All this he deliberately does when he seeks, in the theory of spontaneous generation from inorganic chemical compounds, to account for the divine potentialities resident in the mind of the monoran. When these arguments are fully stated and understood, they will not only be found to establish clearly the theory of the divine origin of life and mind on this earth, but, at the same time, to confirm fully the Christian doctrine of the divine pedigree of man. Having clearly proven the latter hypothesis, I shall then venture to reverse the process of inquiry by taking man as the basis and reasoning back to his divine origin, with a view of finding what conceptions of divine attributes are derivable from our knowledge of the faculties possessed by man. In classifying the latter, I shall be guided by the principles of, and facts developed by, the new psychology. By this I mean the hypothesis of duality of mind, as set forth in my published works. Point 1. I shall, therefore, analyze the faculties of the subjective mind of man, as they have been revealed to the scientific world by means of experimental psychology, and show that those faculties, by simple enlargement and extension to infinity, would become the highest conceivable attributes of an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent God of infinite and universal love, the God of Christian hope and faith. In other words, I shall prove inductively that the soul of man is made in the image of God. Not morphologically or anthropologically is man made in the image of his divine Father, but psychologically. The charge of anthropomorphism will not lie against this conception of God and his attributes, for the trend of the argument will be, not to show that God is infinitely human, but to prove that man is potentially divine. In short, the conception of the deity derivable from the facts of evolution and psychology is of divine immanence without pantheism and of personality without anthropomorphism. Before proceeding to the consideration of the scientific aspects of the question, I shall devote one chapter to that phase of atheism which has been designated as agnosticism, with a view of showing that the principles upon which the latter cult base their conclusions make a prima facie case in favor of the religion which they repudiate.